Hi, I'm Darren Odurier from jpmorgan, and welcome to our jpmorgan Summer Reading List series. Now in its 19th year, our jpmorgan Summer Reading List is a curated collection of books that are submitted by our clients and by our bankers from around the world. The topics range from everything from digital innovation to entrepreneurship to philanthropy, current events, and more. One of the selections from this year's Summer Reading List is Black Fortunes, which explores the untold stories of 6 of the first Black millionaires in America. Our own Sekou Kalin caught up with the book's author, Shomari Wills, to learn more about these stories of personal triumph, of grit, and of leadership. Here's a look at that interview.
Hello, I'm Sekou Kalin from jpmorgan and head of Advancing Black Pathways, a program our firm has developed to build stronger paths towards economic success for Black individuals, families, and communities. Today, I'm joined by Shomari Wills, author of Black Fortunes. Shomari's book explores the story of 6 African Americans who escaped slavery to become millionaires. It's featured on the jpmorgan Summer Reading List as one of our top books to read this year. This story of pioneering entrepreneurs overcoming all odds is truly inspirational. Thank you for joining us, Shomari. Tell us, what inspired you to write this book on these 6 remarkable entrepreneurs?
Well, I think I was partially inspired by my own family's history. My great-great-uncle, John Mott Drew, was one of the first Black millionaires in the history of Philadelphia. He owned a trolley line, which was later purchased by SEPTA. He had a Negro League baseball team, and he was a Wall Street investor as well. So I heard about the stories about Rich Uncle Johnny throughout my entire childhood, so that was always rattling around inside my head. And so eventually that brought me to the stories of the individuals in this book and kind of trying to tell the unknown stories or the untold stories of the first generation of African American millionaires.
What do you think is the common thread that links these individuals' ability to achieve success against all odds?
I think they were fearless because the antebellum era and the era right after slavery was a very dangerous time for African Americans, let alone an African American decided to become high profile and wealthy. So they were just fearless. They didn't cower. They were never intimidated. One story that comes to mind is the story of Robert Reed Church, who was one of the first Black business owners in Memphis after emancipation. And in 1866, there was a terrible race riot. Dozens of people were killed, hundreds were injured, there were millions of dollars of property destruction. And he was attacked by a race mob during this riot, shot in the head, and left for dead. And he came back from that. He survived the gunshot wound, and he built a multi-million-dollar empire in real estate. So just the fearlessness and the inability to intimidate these folks for anything is really something that I think stuck out.
You said one of the biggest challenges of writing this book was the lack of information for African Americans at that time. How did you overcome that?
So the way I overcame that is that the records for African Americans really get better after emancipation. They're pretty much non-existent before emancipation. And most of those records, in the 1860s, 1870s after emancipation, they backdate a lot of events like births and marriages and deaths. So I was able to get around it by finding the documents that were available from later on. But it's just really sad to see that you had this large group of people that were not counted in any meaningful way.
What advice do you have for African Americans today who aspire to be entrepreneurs? What can they learn from this history?
I think they can learn the value of just being aware of what's going on around you in the business environment, even if you're not necessarily participating in it. A lot of the folks in this book were not allowed to participate in the business environment, whether they were involved in entertainment, transportation, extractive resources, whatever it may be. They still paid attention to what was going on around them on an economic level. And so when their opportunity came, they were able to leverage that knowledge to empower themselves and to enrich themselves. So I think even if you can't participate in necessarily what's going on around you, you can always learn from it and prepare yourself for a future time when you will be able to participate.
Your book shatters some of the stereotypes that people have about Black wealth. In your mind, what does the future state of Black wealth look like in America?
Well, hopefully it's broader, and more inclusive. The state of black wealth is much more nuanced than people think. I think we have a very large, almost ubiquitous black underclass, and then you have a few, athletes and entertainers. When the reality is that there are African Americans that are doing, really well in a number of industries, and there is there are a very large of African Americans who are battling with disparities economically, and there's a lot of folks in the middle. So just through that understanding, to just have a more nuanced and intelligent response to the needs and to the disparities and to the opportunities that exist for African Americans going forward.
How do you feel your book fits into the conversation of race today in America?
Well, I think history is important, in terms of the racial conversation. For example, understanding the history of disenfranchisement and grandfather clauses is important to understanding, issues with voting, today. In the same way, what happened to a lot of these characters and a lot of African Americans, where you had destruction of wealth, you had the intimidation of African Americans who were high profile, and you had, in a lot of times, the plunder of wealth from early African American investors and moneyed folks. I think it's important to understand that as we try to understand racial wealth disparity today.
Thanks for tuning in. To learn more about Shomari's book and other top books on JP Morgan's summer reading list, follow us on social media or visit us at jpmorgan.com.